Hello, welcome to the From Way Downtown Pacers podcast, our first podcast of the 2024-2025 season. I am IndyStar Pacer editor Nat Newell, here, of course, with our insider, Dustin Dopirak. I have not gotten any better at saying your name over the summer, it
It was
appears.
close enough. It was close
So,
enough. Yeah.
all right, well, the Pacers had their sort of first quote-unquote official activity of the season
Mm,
with General Manager Chad Buchanan talking to the media yesterday.
mm,
Let's start with the newsy stuff. First one would be Myles Turner. Just
mm,
to lay it out, Dustin has a story up about Turner's contract. They
mm,
cannot extend him this year. He has
mm,
to become an unrestricted free agent because when they extended him last time, they only gave him 2 years. You can
mm.
only extend a 3-year contract. So that means Turner will be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season.
Mm.
Dustin, take us through what Chad Buchanan said about that, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, no, I mean, he said, we want to keep him, and got the impression that that's kind of where they see things. I think if you're digging into the details, obviously Chad Buchanan, as I've noted on here, I think Chad Buchanan gets the microphone in part because Kevin Pritchard will tell you way too much. But
We miss you, Kevin.
I think if we had Kevin up there, we would have got a more extended talking through it in his mind answer there. But I think what stood out to me was him saying that there are some things that you get from Myles Turner, that the fit with Tyrese Haliburton and Pascal Siakam is such that you can't easily replace that with somebody else. I think there's an awareness and understanding that if you let Myles walk, you could go find a talented center for in free agency. Like if you cleared up that space, you might be able to pull somebody off that's go get an athletic guy that can finish lobs. But I think he just noted the way that he can not only space the floor but create out of a short roll. It makes just a huge difference. Like just what they can do out of pick and roll with him. But also when they run, a Haliburton Siakam 1-4 pick and roll, when Siakam operates in those cases, Turner can space the floor. Those guys can work off of each other so well, depending on what role they're playing in a screen roll or any kind of action. It's just not easy to find a guy that's going to be able to give you that. There are obviously a few players that can, but a lot of the players that can are guys that are not leaving their teams. It's not just that they're out of your price range, but they're Joel Embiid and they're Nikola Jokic, and they're not for sale. Basically, it's not even whether you can afford them or not. It's that no one's giving up on the guys they have. And so I think there's an awareness that, hey, there might be better centers than Myles Turner, but you can't have them. So it's like you have this guy or you're going to take a step down. And so they have to be willing to spend the money. And so there's an awareness on their part that Turner is a guy that they have to keep. And so they do intend to re-sign him when the time comes. I also thought another line that wasn't necessarily associated with that question, but that Chad Buchanan said that, the Simons want to win and they're willing to spend to win. At the moment, they are a tick under the luxury tax. They've got about 5-6 million. I think Spot Rack has them right now about 5.4 million, but they've still got some, kind of quirky things leading up to the season, contracts that might not be on the books at that point. But I think that's around where they're at, is about 5.4 million short of the first apron, where it really starts to get a lot more restrictive in terms of what you can do in trades and those sorts of things that you kind of want to stay away from if you can. But I think there's an implication that the Simons are willing to go into the tax if this is going to be a championship caliber team. So provided things would have to go wrong for them not to sign Turner. Turner would have to have a bad year and show signs of decline as he's heading toward 30. And I think the Pacers would have to show signs of decline. This team would have to look like last year was a fluke for them to decide that they're not going to get into luxury tax. They're going to, obviously you have the advantage of being able to, re-sign your own guys. That's how you drive that price up well past the cap. Obviously, it becomes hard to get. You can't really get free agents outside of your own team that cost anything more than the league minimum. But you can re-sign your own guys, and that's how Golden State and Boston and those teams end up way way above the cap as they keep re-signing their own players. But so basically, there's an indication that the Simons are willing to go into the tax to do that if that's what's required, and if this team continues on its current trajectory. So basically that's kind of the piece there is I think they intend to do it. They do still have the advantage. Obviously, as you mentioned, he has to technically become an unrestricted free agent. But just as was the case with Pascal Siakam this offseason, you have the opportunity to start negotiating with those guys, with your own guys, immediately after the NBA Finals. And so everybody else doesn't get a shot until the calendar turns over on June 30. So technically, he would technically become an unrestricted free agent before he puts pen to paper, but you can get an agreement before anybody else talks to him. They still have that advantage. You'll have a couple weeks basically between, the day after the finals. And obviously that depends on whether it's a 4-game or 5-game or 6-game, 7-game series at the end of the day. But they still have that advantage. If both sides want this to happen, Myles Turner never has to take a call from another team. So they could still be in that shape. And I think if things continue on the current progression, that's what they'd like to do.
Yeah, it always drives me nuts. They're like, would you like Myles Turner to be a better rebounder? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, has his shots blocked gone down a little bit over the last couple of years? Yes. At the same time, his scoring's gone up. I think he's far more reliable, consistent, whatever word you want to put on it, now than he's ever been. So you don't get 5 All-NBA players unless you're the Boston Celtics. You don't get 5 All-NBA players on your roster. So of course, he's not a perfect fit, but boy, it'd be really, as you noted, be really hard to find someone who does what he does. I did think that maybe you could have cobbled together between Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Smith, something that a center that was similar and giving you a little bit more flexibility, but that's obviously not going to happen with Jalen Smith gone, and we don't know what Isaiah Jackson's situation is going to be. So what are we thinking? He's going to cost after this year? Obviously, there's a long way to go for this, and what that does. I mean, you've touched on the salary cap stuff, but are we thinking 25 million gets it done, 30 million gets it done? What would it take to bring Myles Turner back?
That's my guess, is it's going to approach 30. Obviously he's not a guy that can command anywhere near in the 40 range. You're not talking about a max deal like you already have with Siakam and Haliburton, unless Turner just has a totally different campaign than we're looking at. But if he's going to get you 18 points and 7.5 rebounds this year, and do it the way he's doing it. I do think the specifics of why he's good matters. Being able to shoot 37% from 3, hit over 100 threes. I didn't realize how good he was in the mid-range. He didn't take a ton of them, but like 10 to 16 feet, he's like 56%. That's a pretty wild number. So I think if I would think 25 is a minimum, but I do think they expect to see obviously continued progression for the cap going up. And if you lock them in at 25 and you're not necessarily factoring raises into there every year, and you're not tying it to percentage of cap, it's just an overall number. I think they, right now 20 feels like a bargain for him, which is what they're paying him. Obviously they threw on all that additional cap money at the end of that at the end of the season in which he signed to renegotiate and extend in January of 2022. And so he ended up with, I think they threw like 20 million.
It was 17, I think we reported, or other.
Yeah. Did he was he making 17? And
I think he was making 20 and they added 17. So effectively they paid him 25 million each of the last 2 years, because you spread that 17 million over the 3 years that they paid him. They paid it all in 1 year, but effectively they paid him 25 million last year and the year before, when you in terms of what the average of the contract was. So don't think of, people should not be thinking of him as a $20 million a year player right now. They should be thinking of him as a 25 million. And so it quickly gets to, if he has the year he did this year, he quickly gets to 30. And the other thing that's nice to see is at one point I don't know, it didn't ever seem like it was an issue, but anytime he had a big scoring game, there was sort of a, hey, I need to be doing this more often vibe from him in the afterwards. And I think that's gone away. And I think he is settled in as hey, if I can score 15, 18 a game, that's,
Mhm.
you know, that what's there to complain about with
Right.
the talent that I have around me? So,
Sure. No, I mean, I think it's just such a like, I don't know that anyone has seen his vibe change just specifically because of what's around him more than Myles. I
yeah,
mean, I think he's always been a guy that they trust and like, but it's just I think he sensed it pretty early too. I mean, he obviously was in a weird headspace in 2022-23, and that's obviously my first year on the beat, and I didn't really know him. But like, he obviously, came in there, did the Woj pod early on and said, hey, the Lakers probably want to, should probably think about getting me because I can do this, that, and the other thing. But that was really the first time, because remember, he was hurt at the end of 2021-22 and didn't really get a chance to play with Haliburton. And I think those first 2 months he got to play with him, he really saw like how they could help each other, how he could help Haliburton, how Haliburton could help him. And he got a sense of what this vibe was going to be like. And you could see just his disposition become sunnier and sunnier until, there was still that thing hanging over him that he didn't have a contract, for the next year. But once he signed, it was like you saw a really different guy, just that they saw that kind of trust. And then last year, it was like he knew, okay, this is where I fit. And this team is at its best if nobody cares who scores. If the ball just moves, it finds the open man, and the open man scores. Whatever that means, whatever kind of action you're running, that the ball moves and nobody's concerned about getting theirs, and that this team has a lot of capacity if it functions that way. That once he really got a grip of that, I mean, you just see a much different guy. I mean, you've seen no sense of nervousness with him about whether or not he's going to be re-signed this time or whether he's going to be talked about in trade deals. Like, I mean, he has seemed to believe this whole time that he's part of the long-term plans. That even though he had a 2-year deal, that's not, that was a two-way street, keeping it that way. And I think believing, both he and Kevin Pritchard mentioned the time, like I said, we got to talk to Kevin that time, and Kevin told us a lot of stuff that day that wasn't even related to Myles, that was useful for us, for our purposes. But I mean, he said, like a big part of the reason they didn't extend past 2 years was because the TV deal was coming up. And the national the national television contract with the NBA was coming up, and that was going to dramatically change the cap situation and everything like that. That financing and everything was going to be a different ball game, so they wanted to for both sides have some freedom there. But it does. I think he's more and more happy with what he's doing, but he just is. There's an awareness that I think he picked up on very quickly, that everybody has this tide, lifts all boats here. And if he just kind of plays his role and hits the shots that are given to him, but moves the ball when it's his opportunity to do so, he's going to be fine. He's going to be taken care of, and he doesn't have to worry about getting shipped off, and he doesn't have to worry about proving himself. So I think that makes him a more valuable player. Just on both ends of the floor, he is more effective because that's his mindset, because he doesn't have to think about whether he has to earn another contract as much.
Yeah, and just to be clear, he was in a weird spot through no fault of his own, and there's never been anything, a weird spot that, yes, he makes lots of money. I don't think anyone needs to feel sorry for Myles Turner, but you should still understand the weirdness of being a professional athlete where they can ship you out at any time.
Sure,
And also, even when he was saying stuff that was a little out there, at no point did it ever seem like it was a distraction, which is a credit to him, his teammates, and all that stuff.
And I think the other part, what Myles has said a couple times, is that the Pacers were really good at telling him everything. And he appreciated that in the long run, as much as he did not enjoy it. And he will tell you, like, he jokingly used the word PTSD last year when we asked him about the deadline. Like, was this a year that you felt like you could not care and not check what was going on? He's like, I'm not going to lie, I still check. He says, man, I still got, just flashbacks from that. So I'm never sure until I get to the deadline and I'm still on the team. But I did feel some sense of ease there, but it did seem like Pritchard was constantly telling him, and it was more or less about, oh, they didn't like him. It was more, okay, we're rebuilding, we're starting over, and we have to look at all opportunities. And if, moving you gets us closer to that, then we have to look at it, and, you're a little bit older at this point comparatively, to some of the other guys we're looking at. So, like he had to know, he had to be informed basically, like, look, this isn't disrespect. This is just how it is. And obviously they had to work through the Ayton thing, which wasn't easy at all. That was obviously the toughest part of that. I think Pritchard said that, that basically that he got reminded of that every time he sat in with Austin Brown, Myles Turner's agent, that, they went out and tried to sign, DeAndre Ayton as a restricted free agent. So, but yeah, getting past all that did bother him. But I mean, again, he just seemed less and less bothered as he stepped away from that, and more, seems to be committed to being part of this franchise. Again, there might be some level of temptation on his part just to see what's out there, because I don't think he's ever really done free agency.
No, he hasn't at all. No.
At the end of the day. So there might be some, again, depending on how this year goes. But if they are, and I don't think they have to get back to the Eastern Conference Finals for him to feel this way. But, if they're still on the right track, I'd be surprised if they're not able to come to an agreement pretty fast.
Other news out of yesterday was Bennedict Mathurin, basically Chad Buchanan saying, where last year they were planning on starting Mathurin, this year they don't. His role is going to be what fits best for the team. Take us through that aspect of the news conference yesterday.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I asked him. They didn't go so far as to say we don't care, but I mean, I remember last year, they were hedging toward that. I think Buchanan said something like, that's probably where he's going to be. Carlisle talked a lot about the sense of responsibility. I mean, I think it was he, obviously when Mathurin was drafted and had the rookie season they had, they certainly viewed him as kind of a franchise pillar and said, okay, like, again, this is the first, top 9 pick, I think, since 1989. Like, you had to go back to George McLeod and Rick Smits the last time they picked that early. And so it's like, all right, when you're investing kind of again, franchise historical pick in him, and then you've already got Tyrese Haliburton, your thought is, all right, these are your 2 guys. Like, these are the guys that you're building around, and so you got to get them in a lineup together. They've got to spend more time together. But Carlisle also looked at it. He looked at it that way, but also looked at it as, hey, this guy's got to earn it. This guy has to earn the right to be in the starting lineup. He has to show he can play 2 ways. He has to show he can fit. He says, but basically he indicated, all right, he's got, like, it would be good for this franchise if he earns it, and if he gets the experience. He used the term responsibility as well that comes with being a starter, and basically the big part of that is you start off guarding a starter, and you're playing a few more minutes and all that kinds of things, and there is a benefit to coming off the bench. Like, you might be the kind of microwave type guy off the bench to score a bunch of points, but you get to do that against a guy that might be coming off the bench also, and you might get to go defend someone who comes off the bench, and all of that is easier than guarding Giannis or Chris Middleton or somebody like that, or OG Anunoby, or whoever you might put Mathurin on the wing. And remember, I mean, he started. I didn't realize how quickly he was out of the starting lineup. It was November 19th was his last kind of in his first string of starts. I mean, they moved him back. I think he got 4 or 5 in a row sometime in February, and I think that might have been when Haliburton was dealing with some things. Trying to remember if Nembhard missed some time, Nesmith missed some time. So I'm not trying to remember who all was out that led to that, but I think it was injury related. And but basically they look at it now and say, okay, he's just trying to fit. He's just trying to find what his fit is, and he's willing for that to be anything. So on one hand, you're looking at it and saying, okay, I don't know that it makes sense for them to start him, because, I mean, they really found, to use another Carlisle term, an ecosystem that worked last year, where you had, you've got Haliburton, Nembhard, Nesmith, Siakam, and Turner as your starting lineup. And what that gives you is a couple things. One, with Siakam in there, you don't necessarily need somebody else like Mathurin that is a guy that can get you a bucket on command. You already have one. In Siakam, obviously you have Haliburton running the show, but if when things break down and you need a guy to go score an ISO and just make one-on-one plays and get to the bucket, Pascal Siakam already gives you that. And so what that allows you at the 2 and the 3 is have guys like Nembhard and Nesmith that are out there, primarily for defense. You have a a balance where, you have two guys that you can, trust to defend the other team's two best offensive players. And that usually gets you through. Basically, if you have two defensive aces, then you're going to be able to match up. Basically, you're going to be able to guard the guys that you need to be able to guard. So you put Mathurin in there, and if Mathurin doesn't become somebody as good as Aaron Nesmith as a defender, you're taking a step back on that end. And they weren't great with those guys, but they were at least better. They were at least a functional defensive team when they had those two guys in the starting lineup. And having Nembhard in the starting lineup also allows you to have T.J. McConnell getting heavy minutes as a backup point guard. And so, you get to make all that work. Nembhard also helps for being a secondary ball handler when you're trying to, move some defensive pressure off of Haliburton. All of that sort of worked. And so if you throw Mathurin in there and you take either Nembhard or Nesmith out and put those guys in the second unit, it jumbles things. It weakens your first unit defensively. It makes for a more complicated issue as far as getting T.J. McConnell in the game. So there's not a clear path there for Bennedict Mathurin to get in the starting lineup, and it doesn't necessarily make sense if both of those guys are healthy and if everybody else is healthy to throw Mathurin in there and just change up the dynamic there. But I think him as a second unit scorer is still a valuable thing. Is still something you can get a lot out of, and something that matters. I think McConnell obviously showed that he could score a lot. Really made more of a point to get his own buckets once Mathurin got hurt. But you get a different level of scorer in Bennedict Mathurin. He still is a better offensive player than Nembhard or Nesmith are, because his just ability to get downhill, score at the rim in the mid range. He got to be a better shooter last year. Is really good. And I think one thing that they mentioned, Buchanan made a point to mention, was that he learned a lot by watching the last couple months and seeing these guys in the playoffs. And I think a few things there. I think he noted that himself, basically in his end of season press conference, that he had to get closer with his teammates, and that was part of the reason he was making cookies and bringing them to games and stuff, bringing them on road trips. But he realized he had to really connect with the guys and see how he just be a better fit. And it sounded like that's something he put a lot of work into, is figuring out, rather than being the guy that just get me the ball and I'll get you a bucket, it's all right, this ball is going to move and you have to operate within that situation. It's not wait till you get the ball and stop it so that you can set up your guy one-on-one and drive on him and score. You have to fit within this team dynamic, and that's who this team is. So who are you in that dynamic? So I think there's a lot of learning on Mathurin's part, as well as getting healthy and stuff like that. But he can be a very dynamic player if he's able to be this good at scoring and do it with the ball moving as much, be able to make quick, Carlisle mentioned quick decisions. So he could be a really valuable guy. I think it then raises questions down the line of, what are you willing to pay that guy an extension, because he becomes extension eligible this summer. If he's coming off the bench, I don't think that could be a max guy. Basically,
well, and does he want it? Does he want to stay? If again, you can. Right. Not in a diva kind of way, but you got to understand, is he looking for another opportunity? So that's that's a really interesting point. You've just touched on this, but it's really hard to envision him being in the starting lineup. He'd almost have to become a better defensive player than Naismith.
Right. And he doesn't have to just be a better defender than he is. He has to be a better defender than Naismith.
Yeah, and even then, I don't know that that's necessarily the best thing. So it'll be, and last year there was all the talk about competition, which is obviously great. And when you have the Pacers have, 12 guys who are legitimate NBA players or whatever, maybe it's 11, whatever the number is. So that can still, but when you're there, but they don't have time to really mess around. They need a win, and they need a win now, which I think they do. So, if we're sort of saying we know Mathurin's coming off the bench, so that kind of cuts into the competition. How do you think that plays out in terms of what impact does that have on this team this season?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what competition looks like, and because the other name that you have to ask and say, okay, well, where's his opening is Jarace Walker,
right? Exactly.
And so you're looking at those two guys again. Those two guys are your first and second top 9 picks since 88 and 89. since Rick Smits and George McLeod. That's the first time you picked in the top nines, twice in a row since then. And at the end of last year, you weren't using either one of them, obviously, because Mathurin was hurt and Walker did not break into the the playoff rotation. But they are super talented guys, and you're obviously by rookie scale standards, you're giving those guys a lot of money. They're getting well paid because they're up towards $10 million a year, even on rookie scale deals. And so when you've got a lot invested in them, you want to give them a chance, and they like both of them. The talent is real. It's not that they came in and were obvious busts. Obviously Mathurin comes in and his rookie season, he scores the third most points any Pacer rookie ever has. First guy to be first team all rookie. I think since Rick Smits, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's still the case.
I believe that's correct. Yeah. I had a great tweet. I said great tweet on my own. So many people retweeted it, but it was from before Mathurin. If you made a list of the number of top 10 picks every team had, the bottom the bottom was 0 by the Pacers, and this was over, like you say, since '89. It was an enormous time. A shout out to Derek Schultz. This was one of his favorite things to point out. I'm sure I've stolen this from him, so I'll give credit where credit's due. And the second to last one with 1 was the San Antonio Spurs, and the 1 was Tim Duncan. So that's that's just a fun little stat there. But and then I think another thing that I see is sort of connected to Mathurin is Tyrese Haliburton and his defense. Again, you've made the point. Like off the ball, he's an effective defensive player. He gets steals. He can do things like that. But I almost think you have to build your starting lineup around the fact that he is not gonna ever be a great defensive player. And I think we have to assume that while Mathurin has shown flashes that he can be a defensive player, it's not consistent yet. So that's another reason I have a real hard time seeing him being in the starting lineup. But and Haliburton is so good at distributing the ball and scoring, especially if he's the first half Tyrese Haliburton that we saw. I mean, it's fine that he's not a great defensive player because he's that good on offense, and they've proven that it works. But what does Haliburton's defense do to this team as well in terms of how it's set up and who can play and who can't?
Right. Now, I mean, exactly. I think now that I think about it, really, if you take Haliburton and Mathurin, you have one really good defensive player. Like if you took both of their characteristics, you would have one great defensive player. And the reason is because Haliburton has the intellect. Like he is where he is supposed to be. Not only where he's supposed to be, but he knows what everybody's running and how to break it up. How to be in position. But if you're taking him on one-on-one, you can back him down because he's skinny and always has been. And so I dealing with his injury and also, playing in the Olympics, didn't really give him a lot of time for physical transformation. Obviously haven't seen him, certainly saw him on TV in Paris, but haven't seen him since then. Have seen a couple of videos, pop up on social media, that kind of thing. Would be surprised if he shows up on Monday dramatically bigger. And dramatically better, better suited to, withstand somebody trying to drive the basketball at him, but again, has the intellect to read everything. And Mathurin on the flip side is physically what you need him to be. And sometimes he gets lost in the shuffle, kind of missing, getting caught up in a screen or some kind of misdirection and not reading it correctly, that kind of deal. I mean, like, I think if you just played one-on-one basketball, Benedict Mathurin would be a pretty good defender because he's got a Jordan-esque body. He's got that kind of long, lean, but muscular, 6'6", 210, like, again, you look at old Jordan, and, Benedict Mathurin's got the same build.
And there was the game against the Bucks. I don't remember which one. They beat them so many times. I can't remember which one, but he's going one-on-one with Giannis out on the floor. And I'm not saying he's shutting Giannis down, but he withstood it. Yeah, he withstood it. Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, I mean, like there was. I think that was the game. I think it was a game in Cambridge where I think Giannis had like 45 or 54, and they still beat him. And like there was a couple really key possessions at the end of that game where Mathurin was guarding him and did really a good job of just like he was getting posted up, but he did not get pushed around. And that's something because Giannis is as physically imposing as any player in the NBA. So he can do that. Like he's got like he's got the physical tools. It's always just been about one, taking it seriously all the time, but having better basketball instincts and having a better sense of his offensive instincts are incredible because he's just so good at setting a guy up and knowing what he can do to get past somebody. It's just knowing, all right, what does this guy want to do to me, but also what does this team want to do to me? Basically if they're going to create kind of a triple switch situation on a screen, where do I go here, where do I go there? You still see some lag there. But yeah, no, I mean, to the point, I mean, like because you have to hide Haliburton, with his matchup at the end of the day, you have to find a way to get him on the worst perimeter player, give him the easiest matchup you can. Really what you want is him running around on shooters. That's kind of what you end up doing. Is you're looking for him to be dealing with a guy that's not going to try to drive the basketball on him, as far as Haliburton is concerned. And so that, makes it even more of an imperative that the next two perimeter players you have are really good defenders. It's tough to justify not playing Nembhard and Nesmith next to him. Because, again, at the beginning of last year, it was him. Remember your 1 through 3 was him, Bruce Brown, and Mathurin, and then you had Hield coming off the bench, and that's that was when the defense was really bad, and like the switch that they made around Christmas that led to some pickup and then being at least a functional defense was putting Nembhard and Nesmith in the starting lineup while Bruce Brown was dealing with kind of a knee thing. And moving Jalen Smith to the 4 before they got Siakam. And that was saying, okay, we're going to get rebounding at the 4. We're going to get Nesmith in here because he's our best defender. Nembhard and Bruce Brown are kind of you can flip a coin as far as, who like what they are defensively. Bruce Brown obviously had some, defensive prowess coming in. And then when you move Brown and you bring in Siakam, it's like, okay, well, you still have to have, you still don't want to take a step back defensively. You keep Nembhard in there, and then that's a good fit. Obviously, at the time, I think when they made the move, Haliburton was hurt, came back, played the one game with Siakam, and then went back on the bench. So you had to. I think Nembhard was, or Mathurin probably was in the starting lineup at that point. I'm trying to think of who ended up at the 2 for those first 5 games. I think it was Mathurin, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, point of the matter, because you can't necessarily believe that you're getting the best, that you're going to get a dramatically better defensive Tyrese Haliburton. It's just more important that those next 2 perimeter spots are good defenders. And so, again, like putting a Mathurin in there is a risk. And putting any there, Nembhard and Nesmith, now you're talking about 2 years where they've guarded the other team's best players. And so not only do you have just the fact of their defensive skill set, you also have the growth that comes with guarding those guys night in, night out, and what it takes to defend them. And so even if Mathurin was showing you that in camp, he hasn't been that guy for the same amount of time that they have. Like they have the experience of guarding Giannis, guarding LeBron, guarding Kawhi Leonard, guarding Paul George, guarding Jalen Brunson, guarding Damian Lillard, night in, night out, doing it in a playoff series. Obviously in Milwaukee, it was Nembhard had Lillard and Nesmith had Chris Middleton. And in the next series, you saw them flip. Obviously, Nembhard had to struggle with Jalen Brunson. Nesmith picks him up and changes that series. Like Brunson's life got a lot harder when Nesmith was on him. I think Nembhard was guarding DiVincenzo after that and did a pretty good job. Even Boston obviously ended up losing those, but I think I'm trying to remember who had who, but I think, they were somehow splitting up, depending on who was on the floor at the time. Derek White, Holiday, Brown and Tatum, they picked up several of those, so I can't remember who had who in terms of how all that was set up. But at various times, each of those guys guarded those guys. So they're used to this. Anybody else who moves into their spot and has to take on those assignments is not.
Yeah, and I mean, to be, and again, to be clear, I mean, Haliburton is such a good offensive player that
Yes. Yeah.
he does not. I mean, the only thing to me, like the ceiling on him with the way he plays defense now is he's never going to be a first team All NBA player. And
Sure.
if that's the worst thing you can say about someone, that's
Right.
they're doing okay. Now
Right.
maybe he's never a second team All NBA player either, but there have been plenty of successful teams that had star players who were not great defensive players. So,
Right.
but it does. I mean, it is the one limit that Haliburton
Yes.
puts on the scheme right now.
Yes.
Exactly as you say, you cannot have another, or it's a challenge to have another defensive challenged perimeter player on.
Right. Long term, I am interested if there is going to be more opportunity for him to physically develop in an offseason and become a better defensive player for that reason. I mean, I think, again, you're looking at he played international basketball the last 2 seasons. That made a difference. And I do think he played it safe last summer leading up to the contract extension. I don't think he talked a big game in April when the season ended of, I'm going to lift every day, like I'm going to have days I don't pick up a basketball day. I'm not going to have days I don't want to lift. But the way he was talking once that contract was signed it seemed like somebody said, hey, you might just don't hurt yourself because, you want to make sure that you get every dime here of what's coming to you. And so between the extension and the World Cup, last summer and the Olympics this summer, plus working through the hamstring, I do wonder if he got to really use all of that time physically the same way that he would have if he gets a kind of clean off season. You head into this year. I mean, I don't think I'm not sure where the next World Cup is, but I mean, I think they got time where he's not going to have international commitments. The paychecks the checks are already going to start. They have already started clearing.
Contract's guaranteed. The
contract is guaranteed. He has his All NBA extender there, so he's getting that full 30% of the cap. And however this season goes, he is going to. He's going to feel it again. I mean, I think he noted after the playoffs were over that, man, you saw just how important defense was, how important rebounding was. He's going to come out of this, if they don't win a title, and he was probably going to see similar things. And he's probably going to have similar reasons for being motivated for physically developing. And he's not going to have something that messes with his offseason. Again, it's just like when you're playing basketball, it's hard to add weight, like when you're playing, even if you don't play that much. I mean, even if you're showing up at practice and you're playing basketball, like, again, you can lift on the side and everything like that. But like, if you're staying in condition and you're running and you're running and you're running and you're running, it's not easy to put weight on. It's not easy to put muscle on. And so if you want to be bigger, stronger, you need to have some time where you're not hooping, and I think that's what he's going to need at some point. Have a summer where he can really bear down, and spend some time focusing on adding weight and adding muscle, so that he can withstand some of the stuff. And I think because that's the long-term issue. And again, I just think it's significant that the last 2 summers he's had an international commitment, and the previous summer he had to be smart about making sure his contract came through.
We'll wrap up with sort of the Greg Doyle, our columnist, wrote about the team having a chip on its shoulder. Everyone's saying that they were, quote unquote, lucky to get to the Eastern Conference Finals. Just for the record, they had a better. They won the season series against the Bucks. They won the season series against the Knicks, not without OG Anunoby, but hey, OG Anunoby doesn't play more than 50 games in a year, so. To say, having him be healthy is hope, not a plan. And then they got swept by the Celtics. I'm not going to make anything more about this than it needs to be. But they were competitive for what it was. So, again, obviously I get it. There were injuries, and they benefited from that. They were missing Mathurin, so that's,
Sure.
But and then they have brought everyone back. So what are your expectations? What do you see from? I mean, to me, and again, this is Celtics are obviously the far and away the number one team.
Right.
Then you get everyone puts the Knicks, the Sixers, and the Bucks in the next group. Understandable, but again, Anunoby's not going to stay healthy. The Knicks don't have a center because Mitchell Robinson is already hurt. We don't know what Julius Randle's role is. Now, would I rather be the Knicks than 27 other teams in the NBA? I would.
Right.
Embiid doesn't stay healthy. I mean, the Bucks have been I could see the Bucks winning 60 games this year. I could see things bottoming out not bottoming out, but I mean, getting to the point where they say, "Hey, this has run its course, and we got to figure something else out."
Sure.
And then you got Cleveland, Orlando, and the Pacers right behind them, who could all be anywhere from second to, I mean, you can include the Heat in there too if you want. I mean, you could be from second to eighth if you're one of those three teams, even though you got to love what you have. Where do you see the Pacers at right now coming into the season in the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they have just every reason to believe that they belong with everybody but Boston at the end of the day. I think another part of the whole argument about, okay, well, they're a fluke, whatever, like what it just comes down to is you had 2 through 7 last year. Separation is 3 games. 3 games. Like the Knicks won 50 and they had the 2 seed. The 76ers won 47 and they were the 7. And so everybody else is in between there. The Bucks won 49, Cavs won 48, Magic and Pacers won 47 each. And so what it really comes down to is, like, obviously, did the Pacers benefit from injuries? Sure. But does that mean, I'm not convinced that they could not have beaten the Bucks if they had Giannis. I'm not convinced they could not have beaten the Knicks if the Knicks were healthy. I'm convinced, sure, they could have lost either of those series too. Definitely. But their depth was a strength. I mean, like the Pacers won in part because they built for the possibility of losing people. They built for, they were running 9 guys. I mean, it's, the Knicks not having depth was a choice. Right. It was a choice. They were playing guys, Josh Hart was playing 48 minutes a game. He was playing every single minute. And so obviously those teams go out and they get better. The Knicks go out and get Mikal Bridges, but they let Hart and Stephen walk. The 76ers go get Paul George, but they had to kind of really restart most of their team. Obviously they have a big 3 in George and Maxey and Embiid. And I thought they made a lot of smart moves in terms of keeping their guys in order and making really smart veteran minimum deals to put a functional team together. They keep Kelly Oubre on the mid-level exception. I think it was a non-taxpayer mid-level at the time. Again, I thought they have a lot of other interesting pieces. I thought going to get the French guy, I can't even. I'm not.
I know who you're talking about.
BY is his initials, but I mean, they got some players, and I think they're going to be, obviously they're going to be pretty good. But again, like the Pacers have a lot of depth. They bring Mathurin back. They still have 2 legit all-stars in Haliburton and Siakam. Siakam is going to be a better fit for this roster. I don't think you should take them out of the tier that includes Milwaukee and Philly and the Knicks. I don't think they're not in there. But again, I don't think there's a separation. I don't think there's a tier line that does not include Cleveland and Orlando.
Yeah, it's really. I mean, you can probably put all 6 of those teams, or let's put it this way: at the end of the year. It's not going to be the top 4. I don't think the top 4 is going to be Boston, New York, Philly, Milwaukee. I think one of those other 3 teams is going to be at least one of those other 3 teams is going to be in the top 4. I mean, that's just
good chance of that. Yeah, good chance of that. I mean, Orlando's dangerous. Orlando is dangerous for sure. I mean, I think the Caldwell Pope signing was great. Adds some shooting and some even more defense to what they already have. And they're going to guard the heck out of you. And Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner are going to be great players. I mean, they are really trending in a good direction. That's a really good young team. They're spending a lot. They spent a lot more money this offseason. But they made some smart deals. I know they got Wagner on his max extension, but those are really good players, and they're big and they're long and they're tough and they defend, and that's going to be a really good team, and that's going to be they're going to be a tough out. But I think I just think you could shake this up and it can go all kinds of different directions. And I think if everybody was healthy, you could have shook it up last year's playoffs in any different way. And it's a totally different bracket if a handful of games go a different way during the regular season. I mean, shoot, the Pacers could have been a 2 seed if they, there are way more than 3 wins on there, 3 losses on there that you're like, what were you guys doing?
Yeah,
you
lost to all the lottery teams they lost to. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Low level lottery teams like San Antonio and the Wizards.
Portland. Oh yeah, Portland.
Yeah. Portland have just owned them. But for whatever reason, they just were not better. They could not beat Portland. Portland was flat out better than them. The Wizards, they had no business losing those games, but they just were. I remember they were just terrible in DC. But yeah, I think there's like when you're talking about that little level of separation. Again, I think the Knicks are better. Like if I had to do a power ranking right now, if I had to do one of those, I would probably put the Knicks and the 76ers ahead of them. And I might put Milwaukee ahead of them and maybe have the Pacers at the 5. But I don't think there would be a lot of separation between the 5 and the 2, in that case. Again, we're talking about 2 to 7 was 3 games. 2 to 8 was probably 4. 2 to 8 was 4, with the Heat. Obviously the Heat aren't as strong, but yeah, I think, the East is going to be wild and wide open, and it's altogether possible that these guys have a better season, look like a better team, and don't get as far in the playoffs.
Absolutely, yeah.
It could very easily, we could be talking about a handful of plays that decide that. And that's what it was in the first place. They had to go 6 to beat Milwaukee, 7 to beat the Knicks. Again, I can't say for sure they wouldn't beat the injured guys. I still think the teams that Milwaukee and New York ran out there were good, were playoff caliber teams. Even if you take Giannis off Milwaukee and you're still dealing with Lillard and Middleton and, Portis, is that the championship caliber, contender that the Bucks thought they were when the season began? No. But do I think if you run that team 82 games, it gets in? I do. I think a team with that talent gets in. I think what the Knicks were rolling with at the end of the year, does that team get in? Yeah, it does. I think a team with, DiVincenzo and Hart and Brunson and Hartenstein is a playoff team. Again, would they have been the 2 seed if they had to run with that group all year? No, but I think they get in. And so I think the Pacers beat 2 teams that would have got in, and they beat 2 teams that had, home court advantage on them. They still achieved something. And, I don't think that doesn't mean they're going to achieve it again. But again, I certainly don't think you view them as they're the definitive 2 because they got that far. But, they have every reason to believe that they can beat those teams and they belong with those teams. And so, again, I just wouldn't – if I didn't have to create tier lines after Boston in the East, I wouldn't. I would just say they're all part of the second tier because it was that wide open last year. It should be that wide open this year.
Yeah, the other thing I found really interesting is everyone always says high-scoring teams don't do well in the or don't do as well in the playoffs as they do in the postseason. And then your depth is less important in the postseason because everyone shortens their rotation. But Pacers made both those things work last year, and right. So it'll be. I just think this is certainly the most interesting going into the season. Certainly the most interesting since the last year of. Maybe the second year of Oladipo. I'm just trying to because the first year, no one expected that team to be that good. So it is probably the second year, and then Victor blew out his leg, and they were never the same. So, but anyway, we got plenty of more to talk about with the Pacers. We'll cut it off here. Again, this is Nat Newell with the IndyStar, Dustin Dopirak. Please go to IndyStar.com for all of Dustin's work. Thank you for watching, listening.